Okay, let's introduce reference angles. So we write a reference angle as theta prime, and it's the angle made between the terminal side of theta and the x-axis. So if you are in the first quadrant, and we're going to talk about these in terms of the coterminal angles that are between 0 and 360. So if you have something that is bigger than 360 or 2 pi or negative, you're going to have to find the coterminal angle, and then this is going to apply. All right, so here we're in the first first quadrant, and we're looking at theta in its terminal side. And remember, theta prime is the angle that it makes with the x-axis. So theta and theta prime in the first quadrant will always be the same thing. Okay, there's theta prime, same thing. Alright, so first quadrant, theta is the same as theta prime. Alright, in the second quadrant, theta's coming around like this. Theta prime is this piece right here. Okay, so here's theta prime. So to find theta prime, you're going to take pi, or 180, it's right here, and subtract theta from it, and that'll give you the piece that's left over. So let's write it this way. Theta prime is pi minus theta, or 180 minus theta, depending on what unit you're in. Okay, and then in the third quadrant, theta's coming around like this, and we see that theta prime is right here. So now we've got all of this is theta, but we only need this piece of it to be theta prime. So theta prime is going to be theta minus pi, or theta minus 180. Okay, because you're going to take away this part of it and just be left with the part that goes over. And then in the fourth quadrant, theta comes all the way around like this, and theta prime is just going to be this little leftover piece here. So it's kind of like the second quadrant one. We're finding what's left over going to 2 pi or 360. So theta prime is going to be 2 pi minus theta, or theta prime is going to be 360 minus theta. Now this might seem like a lot to memorize here, but you don't really have to memorize it. Once you get comfortable with where theta falls, which quadrant it falls into, which we've kind of been working on as we go, once you get comfortable with thinking about where theta is, then you just have to think about what theta prime is going to be. Okay, is it what's left, or is it part of it, or is it the same? And if you can visualize this, it'll help you out tremendously. Okay, so let's work on finding some reference angles now. So let's start with theta equals 5 pi over 6. Okay, now to start with, you may need to draw these out, and that's okay. Eventually you won't need to draw them out. You'll be able to picture them in your head and get your reference angle theta prime from that. So for now, let's imagine it. So 5 pi over 6 is going to be in the second quadrant because we're not quite yet to pi. Pi would be 6 over 6. So we're going to come around like this. Okay, there's our 5 pi over 6. And if we're trying to make it to pi, you can probably do this in your head and realize that there's 1 pi over 6 left in here. And that's going to be our reference angle, pi over 6. Or if you needed to, you could do pi minus 5 pi over 6. Get a common denominator of 6 over 6. And you could get pi over 6 that way. Okay, sometimes if you just visualize them, though, you can figure out what the missing piece is. Alright, next one, theta is equal to 240 degrees, so now we're in degrees. So that's bigger than 180, less than 270. It's going to be in here somewhere. Okay, so 240 degrees. So we see we've gone past 180, and we need to figure out what this piece is. So if we take away 180, we should have what's left over, and that'll be our reference angle. So 240 minus 180, that's going to be 60 degrees. So our reference angle right here is 60 degrees. Okay, next one, let's say we have theta is equal to 7 pi over 4. Okay, 7 pi over 4 is almost 8 pi over 4. So that should put us in the fourth quadrant. Okay, so 2 pi would be 8 pi over 4, so we're almost at 8 pi over 4. All right, and we're trying to figure out this leftover piece right here. So if we do 2 pi minus 7 pi over 4, we just said 2 pi is 8 pi over 4, so 8 pi over 4 minus 7 pi over 4 would give us 1 pi over 4 left remaining. Okay, so our reference angle there is pi over 4, this is 60 degrees. Okay, so, and then remember, of course, the first quadrant is the same as the reference angle. Okay, let's try one that is 405 degrees. So this one's bigger than 360. This one's bigger than 360. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to figure out the coterminal angle and figure out where this is. So remember to find the coterminal angle. Okay, this is bigger than 360, so we're going to take that and subtract 360. And that's going to give us 45. Okay, and we know that 45 degrees is right here in the first quadrant. And so our theta prime is 45. Okay, so for this one, finding the coterminal angle, that gives us where we are in the 0 to 360, and then remember first quadrant, the reference angle is the angle. So our angle is 45. Our reference angle is 45. Okay, let's try one that's negative. All right, negative 2 pi over 3. So remember now we're coming around clockwise. We're going the opposite direction. We're not quite going to make it to negative pi. Okay, so we're maybe right about here. Okay, there's our negative 2 pi over 3. And of course, you can probably tell from this one, all right, you could tell that the reference angle there is pi over 3, or you can go ahead and find the coterminal angle. So coterminal, this time we're going to add 2 pi. Okay, so we're going to add 2 pi. That's the same as 6 pi over 3. And that's going to give us 4 pi over 3. Okay, so you can either visualize it by doing the angle itself, which puts us right here, and you can probably see that there's 1 pi over 3 space remaining there. Or you can figure out the coterminal angle, so this is our negative 2 pi over 3. Or you can figure out the coterminal angle, which would be positive 4 pi over 3. And then our add and subtract from pi and 2 pi works the same as we did before. You don't want to do that with the negative angles because it changes it a little bit. But with the positive 4 pi over 3, then you can say, okay, theta prime is equal to, we see the whole thing is 4 pi over 3. We're going to want to subtract pi from that. Oops. Okay, so 4 pi over 3 minus pi, get a common denominator, 3 over 3. And we get that our reference angle is pi over 3. Okay, and again, you probably could have visualized that from the negative 2 pi over 3 and realized that there was pi over 3 remaining right there. And that's fine. You don't have to write out this work. The idea is to try to get those reference angles pretty quickly.